What is going on, guys? Welcome back. In this video today, we're going to take a look at the Stack Overflow developer survey for the year 2023, which can give us very interesting insights into which technologies are used by professional developers, which operating systems, which editors, which frameworks, which languages, and also some more general things like how many of them have a degree, how many of them use AI tools, and so on. So let us get right into it. Alright, so here we have it, the Stack Overflow developer survey for the year 2023. The results are in, and I myself took the survey a couple of weeks ago and recorded myself while doing that. So if you are interested in my answers to the questions, you can go and watch the video. And I'm always very excited to see the results, to look at the results of this survey, because it gives you a picture, an understanding, an overview of what kind of developers are out there, what kind of tools they're using, what kind of tools are gaining popularity, losing popularity, what kind of tools are loved for years, hated for years. It's just a nice thing to look at, and it's also a valuable thing to look at because, of course, you can discover technologies that are on the rise that maybe you haven't heard about yet. You can see a lot of people are using them, and then you can maybe look into them and learn about them. So for this video, I want to go through the survey. I already looked at a couple of things up front, but I want to go through the survey and focus on the interesting things. So we're not going to go through this like some sort of documentation. I'm not going to cover every single statistic. I want to go through it, and I want to highlight a couple of interesting points here. But of course, I'm going to also explore while doing this. So this is not scripted. I don't have some bullet points of what I want to cover. I just want to go through it and emphasize a couple of interesting insights here. So let's get started. We're going to scroll down here to the first part, which is the developer profile. And the first statistic is actually already quite interesting. The educational attainment here of the different programmers. And you can see that the results are split up into all respondents, professional developers, and people learning to code, as well as other coders, whatever that is. Probably it's defined somewhere. I'm going to mostly focus on professional developers because I don't think personally that there's much value in understanding what kind of technologies are used by people who are not programmers yet. Now, that might be interesting, but I think the real value is understanding what kind of technologies and what kind of things are used by people that are professional developers, and also what kind of degrees do professional developers have. And one thing that you can see here, very interesting, is that most professional developers have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, or even a degree that's higher than that. And this is something that is interesting because a lot of times you hear in developer communities that you can be a coder without a degree. And this is true, you can be a coder without a degree. But oftentimes people think that there are a lot of developers out there, or the majority of developers out there don't have a degree. They don't have a bachelor's degree, master's degree. They're just self-taught coders. And we'll get to that here in a second, whether education and self-taught is a contradiction. But you can see that a lot of developers actually have degrees, bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, or even higher than that. So that's actually quite interesting here. But you can also see that there are a lot of coders, professional developers, that do not have a degree. So this is also encouraging. If you don't have a degree and you don't want to get a degree, it doesn't mean that you cannot be a professional coder, but it's still impressive how many, or it's still interesting how many professional developers actually have degrees. So this brings us to the second point here. This is interesting. Even though we have so many people with a degree, you can see that the most common way to learn things is through online resources in books, not through school or university. Now, this has to be taken with a grain of salt because, of course, none of this is exclusive. So if you learn with online resources, you're not saying that you're not learning through school. But I know when I answered the question, or I think when I answered the question, I also checked school because you learn a little bit in school. You know, I went to technical high school. I did my bachelor's degree, currently doing my master's degree, and I do learn certain things. But the vast majority of my skills, by far, I get from videos, from books, from blogs, from documentation. I don't, or on-the-job training. I mean, on-the-job training is when you get training, right? But learning while doing is a way I learn. So learning stuff in school is actually not a common way for me to learn programming principles or IT principles. I pick up a couple of things there, but yeah. And I think this is usually the case, or this seems to be the case with programmers, because a lot of them went to universities and to school to learn but they say that the number one way they learn is through online resources. Or maybe that's also because the question was asked in a different way, maybe saying, okay, how do you learn right now? And they're not going to school. So maybe that's also a reason. But it's interesting to see that the number one way people learn is through videos, blogs, and other online resources. And then we also have through books and physical media here. So then we have this section here, which is quite similar. You can see a lot of people use technical documentation to learn, and Stack Overflow, also how-to videos and so on. Games that teach programming are not very popular. Then for the course platforms, this is interesting for me as a content creator because I'm thinking about launching courses at some point because people have asked me if I'm going to launch courses. And Udemy, I think, how is it pronounced? Udemy is the number one platform for courses. Now, I don't think personally that I would host my courses somewhere else. I would probably build my own platform. But for content creators, this is interesting to know that Udemy is the number one platform here by far. Then we have some stats here that I don't want to go into. How long people have been coding. I don't think that that's too interesting. Yeah, we can see most people are full stack developers. I would fall into the category of data scientist. Only 2% of people are data scientists, as it seems, and students. Yeah, most people seem to be full stack developers, backend developers, front-end developers. So basically web developers or mobile developers or enterprise developers, software engineers, you could say. And then you have a bunch of other smaller categories here. Then geography is also not too interesting. Demographics probably also not. This is the interesting part here. Technology. What kind of technologies do people use? Frameworks, platforms, languages, editors, operating systems, all that. And you can see we have different sections here. We have the most popular technologies, meaning they're used, and then we have admired and desired. So it could be that you in your job are using MATLAB, and I would not want to swap the place with you in this case, but it could be that you have to use MATLAB, but you don't actually like MATLAB. Actually, the chances are very high that this is the case. But if that is the case, it would still be listed as a very popular technology if a lot of people are in your situation, but it doesn't have to be admired and desired. So that's a difference here. Popular means being used by a lot of people. So what we can see here is we have a lot of languages, or not a lot of languages, a couple of languages that are used by a lot of people that are not really, in my opinion, how do I say that? They are languages, but they're not at the top because people use those languages as their main programming languages, but because they're a necessity. So everyone who touches something that is in the realm of web development has to do something with HTML, CSS, has to do something with JavaScript, and has to in some way interact with a database, means using SQL. The first language, or the highest ranking language that's actually a programming language that you don't have to use, but you choose to use, is Python. So I would say that Python is the most popular one according to this statistic, followed by TypeScript, because TypeScript, you don't have to use it. You have to choose to use something where you need TypeScript, but JavaScript is something that you just have to use. I myself am a Python developer, and maybe I also use other languages, of course, but mainly I would say I'm a Python developer, but I have to work with JavaScript, and I have to work with HTML, CSS, and SQL all the time, just because I have to interact with databases and websites. And when I want to do something in the front end that's interactive, I have to use JavaScript. I cannot do that in Python. I mean, technically I can, but I don't want to do that in Python. So I would say Python is the most popular one among professional developers. You can see it's also the case, TypeScript being number 2. Then Bash, I wou't count that as a programming language per se. I mean, you have to use it, but it's not really like you're a Bash developer. I would say the third place is Java here, C#, C++, PHP still being used a lot, C being used a lot. What we can see here, this is interesting, Go and Rust seems to be, I think they're higher than last year. Now, I don't want to open up the last year's survey to compare, but I think Rust was not as popular as it is right now. So Rust seems to be replacing a lot of C tools on Linux. A lot of these open source projects are now running on Rust and no longer on C, or the new ones are built in Rust and not in C, oftentimes. And Go is also popular, but I think this was already the case. MATLAB, not popular. R, not popular. Understandable. Databases, yeah, amongst professional developers, you can see Postgres is definitely number one here, MySQL or MySQL, SQLite, Microsoft SQL Server. MongoDB is interesting because MongoDB is very popular with people learning to code, not so much with people that do actually. I mean, the percentages are not too far off, but you can see the second most popular database is MongoDB. For people learning to code, for professional developers, Postgres is the way to go. So this seems to be by far the most popular database here. Cloud platforms, this is also interesting. For people learning to code, it doesn't actually make too much of a difference, but for professional developers, AWS is by far the most popular platform here, cloud platform. This is interesting because, yeah, it seems to be to have something special about it. I myself, at this point in time, am not very skilled with AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud. I have to catch up on those skills, but it seems like AWS have something to offer for professional developers that the other two or the other options here don't have. I don't know what that is. Maybe you can tell me in the comment section down below, but this is interesting, definitely. Web frameworks, I'm not going to talk too much about all the JavaScript stuff because that's not what this channel is about. The interesting thing for me, or for us here, is that Flask is above Django slightly. It seems to be more popular than Django. Not so much for people learning to code. So people learning to code seem to learn Django more than Flask, but professional developers actually use Flask more than Django. And I can say that this is the case in my life, because I would consider myself a professional developer because I'm a freelancer and I'm using Flask and not Django in my freelancing, but not necessarily because I wouldn't use Django. It's just because I happen to use Flask. And Fast API also seems to be used quite a bit. So let me just check something real quick here. Okay, I'm back. So yeah, Fast API seems to be used a bit, but it's not as popular as Django and Flask. But those are the three Python frameworks here. And WordPress, yeah, if you want to call it a framework, I would call it actually a content management system, CMS. I think that's what it is. And for frontend, don't ask me. I don't know anything about frontend. I don't want to know anything about frontend. But yeah, you can see the popularities here. When we look at the other frameworks and libraries, this is interesting. It seems to be the case that a lot of people use Microsoft ecosystem. So professional developers use a lot of .NET stuff, which is interesting because we're going to see with the operating systems that not too many people are using Microsoft actually, or Windows actually. So yeah, .NET seems to be very popular here amongst professional developers. We can see for the Python data science world, we have NumPy, Pandas, we have TensorFlow and Scikit-learn and PyTorch and OpenCV. So those are pretty popular packages here. And then we have a bunch of things that I'm not really familiar with. So I know that Apache Kafka is something with distributed system coordination or something like that. I don't know what RabbitMQ is, to be honest. Spring is just the Java framework here, so yeah. I mean, I think we have CUDA here, which is for parallel computing, relevant for machine learning, of course. We have Qt, we have Apache Spark, which is distributed computing, so basically like MapReduce, but Apache Spark. We have Hadoop, which is MapReduce. Yeah, so those are the popularities there. Everyone seems to be using Docker, or more than half of the professional coders seem to be using Docker. Then we have a bunch of package managers here, nothing too interesting, I guess. And then this is interesting for me because I'm a Vim enthusiast. You can see here the integrated development environments of the different people. And you can see that professional developers, all of them seem to be using VS Code, or most of them seem to be using VS Code. I myself am actually not using VS Code at all, but I think you would also check VS Code if you use it occasionally. And I understand that people use VS Code because if you have to code in a language maybe for a couple of weeks that you don't really have an IDE for, I would probably also use VS Code, especially if it gets complex. But my philosophy is that I always use Vim or NeoVim if I have to do some small stuff like edit a small script or write something small, or of course in Python I would use Jupyter Notebook, Jupyter Lab. But for large things, so for large scale applications, big web applications, big systems, I would always use PyCharm for Python, and I would use IntelliJ for Java and stuff like that. I'm not a fan necessarily of VS Code. I don't hate VS Code. I just prefer all the other things. So for Python development, I prefer PyCharm, or when I have to do something small, I usually use NeoVim, or for data science work, I use JupyterLab. So yeah, but VS Code seems to be very popular. But what's interesting to me is that Vim and NeoVim are so popular. So a lot of people seem to be using those. Not so many people seem to be using Emacs. Yeah, for those asynchronous tools, I'm not really using any of them, so I'm going to skip that part. Synchronous tools is interesting. Professional developers seem to be using a lot of Microsoft Teams and Slack, whereas people learning to code use Discord and WhatsApp. So again, we have Microsoft being very present here, which is again interesting because we're going to look at the operating systems. We have a lot of professional developers using Microsoft Teams over Zoom, over Google Meet, over all the alternatives. And we have a lot of people coding in .NET or using .NET, but we can see here with the operating system that most professional developers are not using Windows for their professional use. So for working, they're not using Windows as their main operating system. They're actually using something else. Now, some of them are using Mac OS, but a lot of them are actually using Linux-based systems. So if you sum up Ubuntu and Debian and other Linux-based and Arch and Red Hat and Fedora and I think we also had, no, that's it actually, and Chrome OS, yeah, you get over 50%. So over 50% of developers are using a Linux-based system, not including Windows Subsystem for Linux and not including Android, are using a Linux-based system for development, for professional use, which is impressive. I understand why people use Windows for personal use, because of course, if you want to do some gaming, if you want to do some exotic high-end stuff, I understand that some people use Windows as their main operating system for personal use, but you can see here that a lot of them are not using Windows for professional use, which is interesting, especially given the fact that they prefer to use Teams, or the most popular communication tool is Teams, and then we have also .NET as the most used framework. This is very interesting to see Windows not being used by the majority of developers for professional use. Yeah, so what do we have here? Not surprisingly, everyone's using ChatGPT. Almost everyone's using ChatGPT. Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you? Of course, you can use it in different ways. You don't have to use it to do everything for you, but why would you not use ChatGPT to get a quick sample of something or some quick example of how to use a framework? Why not? Why would you Google your way around some bad documentation if there is no good documentation? And here, this is surprising to me that a lot of people seem to be using Copilot. So the majority of coders seem to be using Copilot. This is not something I expected, to be honest. I know that Copilot is popular and that it's interesting and it has good features, but I didn't think that more people are using Copilot than not, especially amongst professional developers. This is very, very interesting. Now, this section here is basically all of the stuff that we had right here, but not in terms of popularity, but in terms of admired and desired. So basically tells us how much people want to work with it and how much people enjoy working with it. So that's how this is to be interpreted as far as I understand it. And essentially you can see here that the most popular language or the most admired language seems to be Rust. And then we have, JavaScript, Python being probably in the higher end. And you can see, of course, I need to mention this here again. Where is it? I'm going to find you. There you are. MATLAB, of course, not desired, not admired. No surprise here. Yeah. There's not much to say here. You can explore this yourself. The interesting thing is that Rust seems to be very admired. And I think the most desired language is JavaScript. Yeah. They want to work with it. And Python, closely followed by Python. Databases, the most admired one is Postgres. The most desired one, also Postgres, a clear winner here as well. Cloud platforms, the most desired is AWS. The most admired is Hetzner. I don't know what that is, but it seems to be, I've heard about it before, but it seems to be very admired. So maybe this is something that is uprising. And the most hated one, I mean, what's interesting here, we should see probably somewhere Heroku. Do we see Heroku somewhere? There you go. Not popular, not admired. at all because we know it, they dropped their free tier. Web frameworks, we have the most popular being Phoenix, whatever that is, or the most, I say popular, the most admired, but not so much desired. And the most desired is React, yeah, not surprising. Yeah, here the most admired is Tori, whatever that is, and desired .NET again. Docker is very admired and very desired, but the most admired tool seems to be Cargo. Also, don't really know what that is about. This year is interesting to me. The most desired and admired editors. The most admired editor, not surprisingly, NeoVim. The most desired one, VS Code. Everyone uses VS Code. You can see that there's a huge distance here between VS Code and IntelliJ. But yeah, NeoVim is admired a lot. And I think Emacs probably too, right? I mean, I'm not an Emacs user, but I think the community admires it quite a bit. Yeah. And PyCharm, yeah, decent. NeoVim, very admired. And down here we have Rat Studio, whatever that is. Okay, so for asynchronous tools, I'm going to skip that part because I don't use any. Synchronous tools, probably also not too interesting. Now, here for the AI search tools, there are a bunch of them that I don't really know about. Now, everyone admires and uses and desires ChatGPT. No surprise there. For the other alternatives here, I don't know what Find is, if that's how it's pronounced, but it seems to be admired. The second most desired one is Google Bard and then Bing. And Wolfram Alpha. I don't know if that is even AI. It's computational intelligence. Probably that counts to AI, but it's not like a large language model or something. And here we have Copilot, again, desired, admired a lot. And here you can also see the interconnections between what people use and what they want to work with. So Python developers seem to want to work with Python a lot, and with HTML a lot, and with SQL a lot. Okay, give me a proper language here. JavaScript. Go, yeah. I mean, you can see the interconnections here. So let's skip that. I think that's not too interesting for the video. Let's go to this one, top paying technologies. Now, you have a bunch of languages here that probably not a lot of people are using. I think you can go to number of responses, and you can see that not a lot of people are coding in Zig or Erlang or F#. But, you know, you can see that they earn a lot of money because it's a niche. However, the first actual language that we have here in the list is Ruby. Ruby on Rails is a very popular framework. So people coding in Ruby seem to earn a lot, and Ruby is not a niche language. A lot of people code in Ruby, but you can earn a lot of money, as it seems. Then I would say Go is not a niche language. It's popular, and people earn a lot of money with it. Rust seems to be a good choice. Haskell, I would say, is kind of niche, but not extremely. And then Python is average, I would say. And if you want to be poor, you go with MATLAB. Not only do you get a shitty language, you also get bad pay. So yeah, PHP is also not very, lucrative. Then you can also look at the change in salary. Python seems to be rising. What about PHP? Do we have PHP here somewhere? Oh, PHP is still on the rise though. Is there a MATLAB here anywhere? Also on the rise, okay. Yeah, I mean, could be the case. Then for AI, we have a lot of questions about the sentiment of AI. So what do you think about AI? Do you plan to use tools in the future? How are you favorable or not towards AI? You can see most people are using AI or want to use AI. You can see that people are thinking favorably of AI for the most part. Not so many people are thinking unfavorably. I mean, I understand this as a developer, of course. Then you can see what the benefits are for most people. Increase productivity, speed up learning, because you can let ChatGPT explain concepts to you simply. And then you can see here, this is interesting, accuracy of AI tools. Highly trust, somewhat trust, neither trust nor distrust, somewhat distrust. I don't know what I checked here, but I think this makes sense. Somewhat trust means for me, okay, I trust you to a degree, but I'm also distrustful when it comes to complex stuff. So I don't know if I would go with somewhat distrust or somewhat trust, because depends on how much you want to emphasize that you don't trust the AI. I would never go highly trust. I don't understand those people. And I would not understand highly distrust because oftentimes GPT is very, very accurate. So this is a bit too extreme, I think. Yeah, then you can see what people are using this for. And yeah, that's it. And I think that is the most interesting part. I don't think that all this stuff here, I mean, maybe this is interesting. The salary by developer type. Let's go for data scientist here or machine learning engineer. So we have cloud infrastructure seems to be earning a lot. Blockchain developers seem to be earning a lot with a lot of scam schemes probably. Full stack developers, where is the data scientist or the machine learning engineer? There you go. Here it is. Earns a little bit more than full stack developers. Makes sense. I think the work is more complex, I would say, usually. But it seems like, I mean, this is obviously an executive is going to earn more. Manager as well. Marketing or sales as well. But the first developer, actual developer that earns a lot of money is the cloud infrastructure engineer. Interesting. And then what is that? Okay, those are just with the years of experience. And then we have coding outside of work. A lot of people are coding also as a hobby. Contract work. I mean, that is not outside of work, but yeah. And then you can get some stats on the Stack Overflow usage. Now, I encourage you to look through this yourself. I don't want to make this video 2 hours, so I'm not going to cover all the statistics here. I think the most interesting part are the technologies and maybe some part of the work here, of the work section here. But yeah, you can see that certain technologies are on the rise. Certain technologies are being used a lot. And what I like to do oftentimes is I like to look through these lists, take some more time to look through these lists and discover some technologies that I maybe don't know about. So we had, I think, was it... Yeah, RabbitMQ. I don't know what RabbitMQ is. Maybe it's not relevant to me. But this is something that you might look into if you don't know about it. Apache Kafka might be something that you want to look into. Maybe... What else do I not know about? Maybe we can go to some development environment that I don't know about or something. I like to just explore these technologies and pick the ones that I don't know about and to just look into them and maybe I find something that's interesting. Especially with the programming languages, this makes sense if you encounter something that you don't know about. I think the first one I've never heard about is GD script. No idea what that is, but it's not very popular, so maybe I'm not going to look into it. But maybe you have never heard of, I don't know, Kotlin, or you've never heard of Dart, so maybe you want to look into that. And yeah, this is the Stack Overflow Survey 2023. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it and hope you learned something. If so, let me know by hitting the like button and leaving a comment in the comment section down below. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell to not miss a single future video for free. On that, thank you much for watching. See you in the next video and bye.